good morning, everyone. I'm Jane Evangelin Shruthy, and the title for today's presentation is Rituals of Control, Foucault, Food, and Discipline at Hogwarts. Before I begin with my presentation, I'd like to talk about my experience when I watched Philosopher's Stone for the first time, the very first Harry Potter film. So, the scene that fascinated me the most was the scene where they showed the Great Hall with the feast, where they had their dinners, breakfast, and everything. So when I looked at it for the first time, it was very fascinating. The roasted chicken, all kinds of food, the desserts. And at first glance, it looked magical. Golden platters appear out of nowhere, goblets refill themselves, and candles float like stars above the faces of students. It felt like a pure celebration. But beneath all that grandeur lied a system of control, which brings me to the focus of my presentation. So I noticed how every student sit in their assigned houses, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, and the colors dividing them even in times of joy. The head table, raised above the rest, watched over by the professors and Dumbledore, and become a symbol of order and authority. Even the sorting hats earlier labels decide whether each body belongs and where each body belongs in Hogwarts. The timing of the meals, Dumbledore's cues to begin or end, and the prefect's quiet supervision all turn the feast into a ritual of discipline. And while all the food seems effortless, it's the invisible house elves who labor beneath the hall, reminding us that even magic depends on unseen hierarchies. So, what looks like a moment of freedom and festivity is in truth a performance where obedience is served alongside the feast. And in this presentation, I'll be looking at how the seemingly joyful feasts in the Great Hall function as tools of discipline and surveillance. So, I'll be drawing upon Michael Foucault's key ideas from Discipline and Punish, his book, which was written in 1975, and particularly three important concepts: disciplinary power, docile bodies, and panopticism. Through this lens, I'll argue that the Great Hall is not merely a space of celebration, but rather a space where order is maintained, hierarchy is reinforced, and obedience is internalized through everyday rituals, especially through food and feasting. These are the contents of my presentation. Introduction, abstract, why Foucault and Harry Potter, theoretical framework, analysis, conclusion, and this is my abstract. I'll be looking at feasts at Hogwarts. I'll be analyzing them in the context of Foucault's three important concepts, as I mentioned before. And I'll also be looking at the hidden house elf labor, which sustains this system of power. And the feast turned celebration into a subtle act of institutional control. Why Foucault and Harry Potter? So, when I think of Harry Potter, I picture magic, wisdom, friendship, adventure. But beneath all that lies a quiet world of structure, surveillance, and hierarchy. So, this makes Harry Potter films a perfect ground to explore Michael Foucault's ideas of on power and discipline. In his book Discipline and Punish, 1975, he explains how modern institutions like schools, colleges, prisons, and hospitals shape people into what he calls as docile bodies. These become individuals who obey not through force, but through routine, observation, and self control. So, whatever they are doing, it becomes so internalized within themselves that they are completely unaware of the fact that they are following a structure. And Hogwarts, when looked from this aspect, is more than a space of magic. It becomes more than a school of magic. It becomes a disciplinary space. Students are sorted, timed, monitored, rewarded, and punished. The house system, the prefects, the point charts, and even the Great Hall feasts reflect Foucault's ideas of panopticism, where people behave as if they are being watched. So the Great Hall becomes a microcosm of institutional authority. So pairing Foucault with Harry Potter, Let's us see how power hides beneath everyday rituals, even something as simple as a feast, and how discipline operates not just through rules and spells, but also through food, order, and performance. Theoretical framework. So, as I mentioned before, Michael Foucault wrote Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison in 1975, where he examines the shift from public punishment to subtle discipline. It traced how Western societies moved from instilling pain and obedience forcefully within individuals to more subtle forms of control like schools, prisons, and hospitals. So, in this book, he talks about three important concepts. First one is disciplinary power, where he talks about how organization, observation, and repetition are the ways in which disciplinary power works. So, all these three shapes people's behaviors until they internalize authority and become completely unaware of the fact that they are following a structural path. So, I quote from the book Discipline makes individuals, it regards them both as objects and instruments of its exercise. So, here he talks about how institutions shapes individuals through routine, space, and repetition. Docile bodies. So, a result of this disciplinary part is docile bodies. So, a docile body is a body that may be subjected, used, transformed, and improved. As said by Foucault in his book. So, he talks about how power operates through training and regulation and not force. These individuals, they obey automatically because they've been trained to follow a certain order. Moving to panopticism, so Foucault builds this idea of panopticism from Jeremy Bentham's panopticon. So a panopticon is a circular prison, as you can see in the slide. And it's a design where a single guard can see every inmate, but the inmates never know that they are being watched. And because of that uncertainty, the prisoners begin to monitor themselves. And Foucault uses this as a metaphor for modern power. And this is where constant visibility produces self discipline. In the fear of being watched, individuals decide to behave a certain way. In Hogwarts, especially in the Great Hall, we can see the structure mirrored, and the high table acts as a panopticon, where the teacher's gaze keeps hundreds of students orderly without the need for explicit enforcement. We'll begin with the analysis. So I've taken select Harry Potter films and select scenes from the movie, especially the ones where the Great Hall and the feasts are being shown. So the first film, Philosopher's Stone, released in 2001. So the scene is where the grand feast happens for the first time, and the students are being led into the Great Hall. So after being sorted into their houses, they are seated in their designated tables. So we look at how nobody begins to eat until Dumbledore rises. He gives a speech and declares, "Let the feast begin." And instantly the tables fill with food. So for the reference, I've attached the link of each scene from each movie as part of the slides. So in the Philosopher's Stone, during the very first Great Hall feast, the students enter wide-eyed, unsure, and are immediately sorted, a process that publicly categorizes them into the houses and identities that they will carry for the rest of their time at Hogwarts. That is why the sorting hat ceremony is very important. And once seated, they sit quietly, and Dumbledore announces, "Let the feast begin." So, here, what looks like a joyful moment of magic and celebration is actually a carefully choreographed ritual of discipline. The students learn from their very first night to wait for authority before acting, to move in unison, and to perform obedience as part of a belonging. The structure of the scene, the sorting, the seating, silence, and permission transforms a simple meal into a lesson in institutional order. Here, Foucault writes in Discipline and Punish, discipline makes individuals, it is a specific technique of a path that regards individuals both as objects and as instruments of its exercise. So he means that institutions like schools shape people's actions, behavior, and even sense of self through repetition, routine, and subtle control. So, through such repetitive rituals, Hogwarts subtly trains its students to internalize control, turning everyday actions like eating into exercises in hierarchy, routine, and self regulation. The second film I've chosen is Prisoner of Azkaban from 2004. So, this is the scene where this is the start of the term feast, and news has been released that Sirius Black has escaped. This is the scene that I'll be analyzing. So, in Discipline and Punish, Foucault says this quote, I quote, the human body was entering a machinery of power that explores it, breaks it down, and rearranges it. Discipline produces subjected and practiced bodies, as in docile bodies. So, this means that discipline does not simply demand obedience, it restructures behavior so that individuals become instruments of order, functioning smoothly within institutional systems. So, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, this is vividly reflected during the start of the term feast. So, even with the looming fear of the escape of Sirius Black, the atmosphere in the Great Hall remains strikingly controlled. The students sit in their assigned places, the four house tables forming neat divisions of identity. Dumbledore and the professors watch from the raised high table. The ever present gaze of authority remains. And the prefects, they circulate between rows, maintaining quiet order amid uncertainty. So that despite the tension in the outside world, the inside world of Hogwarts operates with mechanical precision. Every movement, sitting, eating, listening, follows the unspoken script of discipline. Foucault's idea of the body being explored, broken down, and rearranged fits this perfectly. The students' collective rhythm, gestures, and silence demonstrates how power works not through punishment, but rather through habit. The Great Hall here is more than a dining space. It becomes a disciplinary mechanism. Through repetition of posture, timing, and regulated behavior, the students internalize the structures of control. Power here doesn't shout, it doesn't punish, but it slowly watches, directs, and shapes, creating docile bodies that act in harmony with the institution's unspoken rules. The next movie, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So, the scene here is where Dumbledore announces the Triwizard tournament and he welcomes groups of students from other schools, the Beauxbatons and the Durmstrang students. So, this is the scene I'll be analyzing. So, here, the start of the term feast in the Great Hall, it illustrates Foucault's concept of panopticism, the subtle exercise of power through visibility and self surveillance. So, as students from Hogwarts and the visiting Beauxbatons and Durmstrang enter, the hall becomes a space of structural observation. Four long houses, tables sit in perfect alignment. All the house tables and the students, they sit in perfect alignment. All eyes naturally drawn toward the staff table where Dumbledore and the teachers preside. The architecture itself encourages discipline. The symmetry, the high ceilings, and the centralized staff table make students constantly aware of being seen. So Foucault states that he who is subjected to a field of visibility and who knows it assumes responsibility for the constraints of power. So this dynamic is evident as the students sit upright. They speak in low tones and display attentiveness to what's happening in the hall. And this is happening not through direct coercion, but because the environment fosters self regulation. So the presence of the visiting students intensifies this scrutiny. The students and everybody in the room become even more self aware that they are being watched. Hogwarts students perform order aware of both peer and teacher observation. What appears as a welcoming celebration becomes a controlled display of behavior. Power operates quietly through the internalization of the gaze. The Great Hall, in its design and social dynamics, functions as a panoptic space, a place where everyone watches and is being watched, and where discipline emerges from visibility itself. The next movie, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and this is the scene where Dumbledore introduces Dolores Umbridge, and that is the scene that I'll be analyzing. So, in the Order of the Phoenix, the start of the term feast takes on a more darker, more controlled tone. So, Dumbledore begins his welcome speech, and Dolores Umbridge, interrupts him. Her voice is soft and sweet, but it is laced with authority. The great hall, once alive with chatter and laughter of students, falls silent. The professors exchange wary glances. Students sit stiffly, immediately aware that something has changed. This scene exemplifies Foucault's discipline and punishes concept of panopticism. So he talks about how, I quote, he is seen, but he does not see. He is the object of information, never a subject in communication. So here, Umbridge functions as a living watchtower. Here, she never communicates order in words. It's her presence does the job here. Her presence alone compels students to monitor themselves, whispering less, straightening posture, controlling gestures. Even after the feast, her authority persists through the walls of Hogwarts, turning Hogwarts into a constant field of observation. The Great Hall, once a space of joy and belonging, has now become a subtle mechanism of power, showing Foucault's insight that control works best when people internalize the gaze and begin disciplining themselves. Invisible labor and panoptic power, house elves in Hogwarts. So, we'll focus on the house elves and the invisible labor at Hogwarts. In the books, it has been revealed that all the food is being in the great feasts are being prepared by the house elves. But in the films, the food magically appears on plates. So these house elves, they work tirelessly, cooking, cleaning, magically organizing these enormous spreads of food. But here's the interesting part. Students rarely see them at work. In the movies, it's even simpler. The food just appears on the tables as if by magic. Now, why is this perspective important from a Foucauldian perspective? This is because Foucault talks about how disciplinary power, where control is often subtle and works without people fully realizing it. So the elves here, they operate quietly, efficiently, and behind the scenes. They make sure Hogwarts functions smoothly, yet they are barely noticed. So when we think about it, the school rules, Hogwarts rules, the hierarchy, the surveillance, all of it works in a similar way compared to this. Students internalize expectations and discipline themselves, much like they take the presence of food for granted without seeing all the labor behind it. So the house elf's hidden work becomes a symbol of invisible power. They sustain Hogwarts, but they are hidden. And the rituals without recognition, just like power at Hogwarts, operates quietly, shapes behavior without being obvious. The grandeur of the Great Hall and the abundance of food aren't just a magical spectacle, but they are a subtle lesson. Power and labor don't always have to be visible to influence behavior and maintain order. So, I'd like to say that at Hogwarts, eating is never just a source of nourishment. It's not just mere sustenance. It is a lesson in obedience, a ritual of control, and a subtle exercise of power. So, across the Harry Potter series, food and feasts are never just about nourishment or celebration. Through the lens of Foucault's ideas on disciplinary power, docile bodies, and panopticism, we can see that these moments of apparent joy are carefully structured rituals of control. From the very first feast in the Philosopher's Stone to the tense monitored gatherings in the Order of the Phoenix, students are subtly guided to internalize authority, follow routines, and regulate their own behavior. Even the unseen labor of the house elves reinforces this system. Hogwarts runs smoothly because both invisible and visible mechanisms maintain the order of discipline. The grandeur of the foot, the architecture of the hall, the arrangement of tables, and the constant gaze of teachers all work together to teach obedience, hierarchy, and discipline, and self discipline. Ultimately, Hogwarts shows us that power often works quietly, not through force, but through subtle observation, repetition, and internalized discipline. What seems like freedom and festivity is in reality a carefully orchestrated performance where magic, food, and ritual combine to shape behavior and maintain control. Thank you, everyone.